Greetings. My name is Dilla, and you can call me Na. I love to work with divination through tarot and astrology. I want to focus on the astrology in this jam, and very specifically, I'd like to get into a branch that I have come to enjoy is transition charts. What's a transition chart? It is just like a birth chart, a casting of a chart at the time of someone's transition or passing. And this can also give you a lot of insight to what that person was going through. It allows you to hold space for them in their passing, even though we may not have been there. After all, we know that energy cannot be destroyed, it can only be transformed. Will be reborn again and again. So today happens to be the anniversary of June Seba, otherwise known as Nujabes, that beat master extraordinaire, producer, record store owner, and regular music enthusiast. He passed away on this day, February 26th, in 2010. And in fact, as I'm recording this, it happens to be an Aquarius moon, and he happened to be an Aquarius sun. However, as I was going through the stuff with his chart, I also happened to discover that someone that is in a similar genre as far as beats go, JDilla, JD, he has the same birthday as Nujabes, the same birthday, February 7th, 1974. So they were Aquarians. So like I might have Nujabes chart pulled up here, but there's no difference because they were born on the same day. And what was interesting was I could not find a birth time for either one of those cats, and I looked pretty hard. Couldn't find a birth time for either one of them. So we cannot trust the houses here. We can only trust the signs, and then, the degrees will vary. So even though they were born in different parts of the world, they essentially had the same chart. Only a couple of placements had maybe a little difference in degree. But anyway, let's get into it, shall we? So they were both like not just Aquarius suns, but they were super Aquarians, okay? Why? Because we see that the sun in Aquarius is very close to Jupiter in Aquarius. All right, so Jupiter likes to blow up or exaggerate the energy around whatever placement it happens to be around. And in this case, it's the sun. And what's funny is the sun also does that. Whenever we see the sun close to any placement in a chart, we also know that the energy of that happens to be much greater. So here with the sun and Jupiter being so close to each other in the same sign of Aquarius, talk about invention, talk about foresight, and being able to create something new for the collective, being very authentic, being very different than anyone else around them. Even though they might have fit in, they did not quite fit in because, again, very much ahead of their time. But that's definitely right? The sun close to Jupiter. In fact, they love to study. They love to study music. They had very much a heart. Again, that's air, and Aquarius is air. They had a heart for music. In fact, let's go over here to this Venus that they had in Capricorn, right? And out of bounds Venus. So they very much valued, music and musicianship. In fact, I know JD, his mother was very much into music. And for Nujabes, his father was a jazz musician when he wasn't at work. So they both had this upbringing to very much value classical music. And when I say classical, I mean not just, Mozart. I'm talking about jazz. I'm talking about, right, the origins of music herself. And both of them learned how to play instruments at a very young age at home. And so, again, like out of bounds, Venus and Capricorn, they really had a foundation in caring for and studying music. In fact, JDilla had perfect pitch, from what I understand, which is why it was so easy for him it didn't matter what the genre of music was, he could find one track and match it with another because of his ear, his amazingly sharp ear. Right? That Aquarian vibe, being able to hear and invent something before the rest of the world gets to it. But I think that original way of being brought a lot of difficulty as children, because they weren't like everyone else, because they were so obsessed with music, because they didn't look at the world in the same way that others did. I'm sure in their youth that brought them a lot of difficulty. And in fact, I think for June, it was more about that difficulty was more about just being rather inward. But for JDilla, I think it was more about, I don't know, I think it was more about his health, dealing with, what was he dealing with here? I can't remember off the top of my head. Let me look at my notes. I don't know why. I thought I wrote it down. It's not super important. But it was also something his mother had. Lupus, there we go. But it's still like it's Aries. It has to do with the self, right? Feeling very self-conscious in their younger years, but then having that actually turn into something very wonderful as they got older, because it wasn't about, I don't know, they weren't so self-involved. In fact, it was more about, right, just constantly learning, constantly listening to music and learning new kinds of music, learning new instruments, learning how to use technology to bring these different aspects together. In fact, yeah, what I think is really funny and cute that they both shared, that Mars and Taurus, right? Like they both had an extensive record collection. In fact, you could say that they both literally had record stores at home, literally a library of albums. In fact, I would see pictures of both of their workspace, and they were virtually the same, where there would be like a wall of records, and then there would just be all this recording equipment. And this is just where they would spend hours upon hours days at a time just listening to and or recording and playing with different rhythms. And I mean, they worked hard. They both spent a lot of time, right, taking action towards building this dream of being able to bring these different genres together, you know. In fact, they came here with this gift. South Node conjunct Saturn. The South Node in a chart often talks about like what we brought with us from our past lives, if you can subscribe to that. And it can talk about also what we might need to release. But here we see that that's a gift they came here with. They came here with, right, that South Node and Saturn in Gemini, right, about that communication. This was mastered before they even came into this world, this work ethic around bringing these different ways of communicating into something that hadn't been seen before, and something that ended up traveling the world wide, right? Like it didn't really see borders, right? They both had a moon in Leo, so talking about, right, like maybe not being the most social butterfly, and yet both of them had an inner knowing that that's what they were here to do. They knew that they were here to do things in music and to perform music in some way, shape, or form, right? Like that was very important to them. And so, happy anniversary. In fact, that's what I would like to get into. There was a lot of weird circumstances around June's passing that still have not been resolved and actually are very mysterious. And, we'll get into that. And also, hey, what's going on, JD? We're going to look at his passing as well, which not so mysterious. And yet it's just so fascinating. We're going to look at their charts. In fact, what I thought was also very fascinating, okay, because I really wanted to get off into the astrocartography of these two, but because I didn't have a birth time, I left it alone. I mean, I still pulled up a chart just so that I could like get in my mind. I'm like, well, these guys are so similar. They're so freaking similar, even though they weren't born in the same place and they didn't have the same culture. Or even the same circumstances, yet they somehow did have the same circumstances in regards to how they regarded music and how they were obsessed with it, the playing of it, the different genres of it. They share the same latitude, bro. Look at this. Detroit, Michigan, OMG. And there's Tokyo, Japan. They were on the same latitude, born on the same day. Anyway. Okay. So this is Nujabes transition, all right? So that's what was also interesting about both of their charts when looking at their passing, is that they both passed in the same month that they were born. Very fascinating. So, both in the month of February. So with June's chart, we see that he passed 2 years later, or 3 years later, than JDilla. It was February, like I said, February 26th today, but in 2010. And on that day, or in that time, we see here Uranus, which is the planet that has a lot to do with the weather, was out of bounds in Pisces, 25 degrees. I'll talk about why that's even important, but there's just a Pisces stellium, okay? Like a lot of planets in Pisces, the Sun, Jupiter, Venus, and like I said before, Uranus. So all these planets in Pisces already is talking about there being a lot of mystery. Again, I could not find the time of the passing. I could not. Again, we know that he passed from a car accident, but a lot of people disagree that that's what happened because they say in Japan that sometimes what is the when people unalive themselves in a suicide, that they will also say that that's a car accident, and then they people want to wax poetic about how he was really depressed because he was working with jazz and all this stuff. Something didn't feel right about that because for me, he was a dad. He had just gotten a house by the ocean, and he had a new recording studio built in his home. So it kind of seemed like he was locked in to do more. But I mean, we looked at the chart of them both, and they both were known to work very hard, overwork even, like obsessed. It doesn't mean that necessarily that's a reason to want to unalive yourself. That's not what I'm saying. What I will say is that it would make someone really tired. But again, like we see Chiron and Neptune and Mercury all in Aquarius. So this would talk about how his passing was very mysterious to people and why a lot of the details were not released. But then also, this I feel like is a really good point to mention is most parents who outlive their children don't necessarily want to get into the details in the public eye about their child's passing. That is definitely a huge point of sorrow and pain that maybe folks don't want relived over and over again on the internet. And people have the right to have that privacy, but I feel like that's that Chiron and Aquarius, right? Not wanting that information to be in public. And in fact, Chiron and Neptune are at the same degree, 26 degrees. So again, there being a lot of mystery surrounding the passing, like what was the accident? But we do also see that Mercury is in Aquarius at 24 degrees. So it's also conjunct that Neptune and Chiron. All right. So literally, Mercury is known as the traveler. He was in his car on the freeway when this accident occurred that happened to be fatal. He passed in the hospital. All right. And in fact, what I also have marked down here is that it was a Leo moon when he passed. And that was his natal moon. And his natal moon was 20 degrees. Well, again, give or take, because we don't know his birth time, right? But we know that it was more than likely a Leo moon when he passed. And what's also interesting is that it was Mars conjunct the moon. So again, Moon Mars is a very interesting and strange combination where the moon again is about mystery and or something being sudden, unexpected, and then Mars being an accident, right? So, yeah, like it was just past his birthday. So oftentimes when I look at a chart with someone, when I see that they have passed around their birthday, that usually does tell me that it was their time. But in this particular case, I mean, yes, it was right around his birthday. In fact, it was the same birth month, and in fact, right, the same moon even that from the time he was born. But it's that moon, the moon Mars thing tells me a little bit about how there was that this was an accident, that it wasn't something premeditated or planned, okay? And I'll get into that a little more because it does have a lot to do, like, bookmark this out of bounds Uranus that has to do with the weather, okay? Let's look at JDilla's chart. This is the chart of someone whose time came. And even though, again, early, and that's what's so sad, they both passed in their early 30s. In fact, remember that in both of their birth charts, they have the Saturn conjunct the South Node, and they both just lived past a Saturn's return. Just past a Saturn's return. And then, boom. But here, again, I could not get a time for JDilla, but he was having a Mars return at that time, while he was having a Mercury return at that time. I mean, he only passed 2 days after, but seriously, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be having your Mars return on your birthday. You know what I mean? So this is some interesting stuff. So Mars return, Mercury return, Venus return as well. Venus in Cap. It was moving forward instead of retrograde like it was at his birth. So just those 3 planets alone, he was having a Mercury, Venus, Mars return. What? Then we have Pluto on his North Node in Sagittarius. So that North Node being that point in your chart where it's where you're meant to go. It's where you can focus on. We have free will, though. We don't have to focus on it. We don't have to do those things. But with Pluto being the planet of transformation, right? The ruling planet of Scorpio, right? In Sagittarius, though, that's like an expansion. So here's that North Node, his natal North Node at 27 degrees Sag. That Pluto was at 26 degrees Sag, just boom. So transformation station, him going to the next world. We also have the Jupiter is on his Pars of Fortune in Scorpio. So again, another marker of transformation, of just moving on into the next world. And then even the South Node here is sitting on his natal Pluto. So he goes into relationship with releasing his station in this life, if that makes sense. He was sick for a long time. In fact, they found that he had a rare blood disease. He was already struggling with lupus. At this point in his life, he had so much in terms of hospital bills for one thing or the other. He got out of the hospital. And in fact, he passed away from, I think, a heart attack because of this rare blood disease that he had. It caused blood clots. But he was jamming. He was, making music all the way up, quite literally, until the end. So, right, his Mars in Taurus, his Venus in Capricorn, and his Mercury in Pisces. Quite literally Mercury in Pisces. That is crazy poetic. He literally went into the next world creating music. He was doing what he loved to do, what he valued doing. In fact, what I thought was really interesting, that Mercury in Pisces, if I can talk about this with both of them, with June and Jay, that they both like to jam in the car, that's a lot of jam sessions and listening to tracks as they were being built often happened in the car. They would just go driving, or even how JDilla got discovered was on a tour bus. There was this, traveling while listening to music was a thing. So here, let's get into what tripped me out. So one of the things like that got me back on to doing this chart for June, and then I realized, oh my gosh, I was working on this last year, I need to finish it, right? There's a song called Imaginary Folklore that happens to be on a collection from Hideout Productions Volume 2. And on Imaginary Folklore, like, this song really haunted me, and I had it on repeat for a little while, and then I realized, oh, I need to look up the lyrics. Let me look up these lyrics. So verse 1, the night that the fierce typhoon passed, I was looking down on the city from the top of a tall building. The wind was still a little erratic, tearing at the edge of its departure. The lights of the houses nearby shimmered like through searing air. I never witnessed a scene like, though I was used to seeing it. Right? Like, and the hook was, something is going to change. That's how I felt. In a little while, it disappears quietly. June, number 6, in a little while, in a little while. And I thought, oh, wait, hold on a second. Let's look at the weather the day that June passed. And the weather was crazy. In fact, that day, February 26, 2010, there happened to be a earthquake. Let me see here. There was a tremor around 8 p.m. GMT off Okinawa. All right. And all that day, we can see like winds got up to like over 40 miles an hour, and wind gusts as well. Wind gusts stayed at like 30 miles an hour that whole day, but it really kicked up around 3 p.m. or so. And so I wonder if the time of his passing actually was around, around like midnight or 9 p.m., somewhere around there, because first we see that the winds kicked up there. But let me rewind. The whole point of me bringing this up was that, have you ever been driving on the highway with a really strong gust of wind? It's not awesome, especially if you're driving a van, which he did. That can easily push you into another lane of traffic. That could easily flip your car over. And like I showed you guys to remember in your mind, Uranus that day was at 25 degrees. So it was out of bounds, meaning it was being more erratic, more irregular than usual. And it was with Pisces. So the weather, like I thought maybe it was going to be raining or something, but no. Actually, right? It was the wind. I mean, that's Oya, right? Like Uranus is Oya, and Oya is all about that thunder, that lightning, the wind. And I think that might have been the strange car accident that came out of nowhere. And eventually, later on that day, there was a tsunami warning given to Okinawa, like that night that he passed. And then that's, verse 2, I cleared a period of low pressure. That's how I felt in a little while. My feeling suddenly becomes lighter. That's how I feel in a little while. In a little while, something is going to change. That's how I felt. It disappears quietly. I feel like there was a song just trying to tell me that, again, he didn't kill himself. He did not do that. It was just a weird Moon Mars accident. Like, it came out of nowhere. The weather. it caused an accident. But what's interesting is both of them had untimely deaths. They both didn't really live too far into their 30s. They just cleared a Saturn's return. They both put in a whole lot of work. I feel like 3 lifetimes worth of work in that short period of time that either one of them was alive. And I just want to say that I'm grateful to them both for their contribution to the musical world. And I don't think that they ever met. I think that he was a huge fan. I think that Nujabes was a huge fan of JDilla. And I think maybe in kind he was also a fan of his as well. But ultimately they were the same person. They shared the same Mercury. And often when people share the same Mercury, you know, that's to me a marker of what's the word I want to use here? Telepathy. Like, I think they both helped each other break bounds and create new frontiers, which are now happening way beyond their being here. Like, they both are gone, and yet people are still being deeply influenced by the work that they put out in such a short period of time here on Earth. And so, wow, thank you, JDilla. Thank you, Nujabes. Thank you, astrology, for, you know, bringing up the point that two people who didn't even necessarily know each other and weren't even born in the same part of the world, they still shared latitude and still ended up having a very similar life experience. And it's very humbling to bear witness unto the stars and the saying that as above, so below. Thank you for your time. Sending you peace.